Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Put the kettle on because we're going to talk some boxing. Now, Oleksandr Usyk and Joyce. As we know, Undisputed will be taking place, so that keeps all of the titles on the line for that Undisputed fight, meaning the WBO will be the interim title that Joyce and Oleksandr Usyk fight for. Now, there have been some negotiations and we've had an update from Oleksandr Usyk with regards to those negotiations. This is what he had to say. Joyce's team made us an offer. The offer was unsuitable, so we made a viable counter-offer. Joyce shouldn't think so much of himself and fall in line with everyone else. I'll be the one making the final decision. So there we go, that is what Oleksandr Usyk has explained about negotiations with Joyce for this interim WBO World Championship fight. Now, him saying that Joyce needs to fall in line with everyone else, Joyce is ranked number 2. So he has gotten to where he is based off of merit alone. This has not been gifted to him, and I'm not saying it's been gifted to Usyk either. Usyk was a champion in Cruiserweight. When he moves up, he automatically becomes mandatory. Those are rules within the WBO and they've been there for a while, so that's fine. But Joyce beat Daniel Dubois, and that gave him his ranking. So therefore, he's put himself in that position based off of taking a risk in a tough fight against Daniel Dubois, one of which many didn't believe he could win. So therefore Joyce absolutely does not have to fall in line with everyone else. That is not the case here. This is a vacant WBO interim championship fight. Yes, Usyk is the mandatory to Anthony Joshua, but in this contest they are even. Of course, Oleksandr Usyk is ranked number 1, he is the mandatory, Joyce is number 2, so if there is a split that goes anyone's favour, it should be Usyk, but not by 30% or something like that. It should be just Usyk's favour by 60-40. That is the margin it should be, because Usyk is not the champion. He's not made champion by the WBO. He's fighting for a vacant title that has been put on the line so that AJ can go and fight for Undisputed with Tyson Fury, and so that the heavyweight division does not stagnate as a result of that. That is the idea with the interim status. It's not necessarily there just to appease Usyk. It's there to keep the heavyweight division moving. Put it this way, no one in 2021 is getting a world title opportunity in the heavyweight division because all of the titles are tied up in Undisputed, all 4 of them, 5 if you want to count the IBO. But considering that amount of titles are on the line, there would be a mandatory this year for at least 2 of those belts. That cannot happen. So if that does not happen, Usyk is not a mandatory, and say the WBC, no mandatory, and that is also down to Dillian Whyte losing to Povetkin and the rematch happening. Otherwise, had he beat Povetkin, he would be mandatory and Tyson Fury would be fighting him, unless he could get an exception. So there would be 2 mandatories. Dillian Whyte has to rematch Povetkin. Usyk has been ordered to step aside by the WBO to allow Undisputed to happen. So the interim status keeps the heavyweight division moving, just like the interim status with the WBC keeps the division moving. Now, when it comes down to splits for this fight, should Usyk get the bigger part of the portion just because he had a pay-per-view fight last time around with Derek Chisora, and Joyce didn't with Daniel Dubois? Still a big fight, but it wasn't pay-per-view. Based off of that alone, should there be a bigger split going to Usyk than there is for Joyce? Not necessarily just because of that, that does factor into it, but also because Usyk is higher ranked. So as I said before, if there is any kind of split that favours Usyk, it should be 60-40, no more, no less. It would be different if Usyk was a champion and Joyce was a mandatory, then things had changed, but Usyk and his team are approaching it that way. They are seeing themselves as the champion, giving Joyce the opportunity, and that is not the case. In that case, it would be something like 80-20 favouring Usyk. That is likely what Usyk would have gotten in the fight with AJ, but that obviously never came off because AJ is going elsewhere to fight for Undisputed. But had that happened, that would have been the pair split between those two. It seems like they are looking at that. I mean, Alexander Krassyuk recently said it should be 93 to Usyk and a 7 to Joyce, given their last 3 fights and the money they have generated based off of those events. What he also explained is there is no statutory purse put in place, so they are left at their own discretion to sort out this deal for this title fight. So therefore, there is no kind of 50-50 if it gets to purse bids, there is no 60-40 if it goes to purse bids. They have to sort it out themselves. And they clearly seem to be unable to do that, with Joe Joyce's team making a clear offer to Usyk, one that was not substantial and good enough for Usyk to take. They have now made a counteroffer, but they say Joe Joyce must fall in line with them and what they want, almost like they are giving Joe Joyce the opportunity. Make no mistake about it, the WBO have ordered this fight. The WBO gave Joe Joyce the opportunity, just as they gave Usyk the same opportunity to fight for a vacant interim world championship. And that is the case, so Usyk cannot claim to be the champion going into this fight, and with the negotiations as well. The WBO do need to step in and say, this is going to be the split, or we are going to purse bids to move this fight along, because as I said before, the whole idea of the interim title is to keep the division moving, and all that's happening with this fight is it's being stalled because of those negotiations not working out between both camps. I mean, Joe Joyce spoke about the fight possibly taking place in April. That's not going to happen now because they are nowhere beyond even finding a financial split. Let's remember also that Usyk has only had 2 fights at heavyweight since moving up after fighting Tony Bellew in 2018. So he's been a heavyweight for a long time, but he's only had 2 fights. I know there is that rule with the WBO, and he is undisputed or former undisputed cruiserweight champion. He demands a certain amount of respect. He's an incredible fighter, but he cannot consider himself the champion going in. And as I said, he hasn't done huge things at heavyweight, done amazing things at cruiserweight, but this is a different division. Joe Joyce has some good wins in the heavyweight division. Bryant Jennings, Bermain Stavern kind of, and obviously Daniel Dubois. Some really good wins in there for Joe Joyce, proving that he has earned the position he is currently in. That needs to be looked at as well, going into negotiations for this fight. Is Usyk more of a draw than Joe Joyce? Based off of the fact that he fought Derek Chisora last time out, and Joe Joyce fought Daniel Dubois. One was pay-per-view, one was not. But why was Usyk versus Chisora actually a pay-per-view? Was it because of Usyk, or was it because of Chisora? Who's had more pay-per-view fights out of those two in the UK? Derek Chisora. He was the big draw. He was the one lending his name to Usyk for that fight. So was Tony Bellew when they fought. So if they want to use that as leverage in these negotiations, then they need to remember that they were fighting names that were bringing those pay-per-view numbers to that fight. I know Usyk was involved in the event as well. Again, incredible fighter, very talented, but I wouldn't say he's any bigger of a draw than Joe Joyce is. That is something they have to look at in negotiations for this fight. I don't actually believe that Usyk wants to fight Joe Joyce. It doesn't seem that way at all, because they spoke about fighting Anthony Joshua, and if Undisputed does not move along, they said that the WBO need to be brave and order AJ versus Usyk because he is mandatory. Now, Undisputed is moving forwards, so therefore there is this interim title fight between Joyce and Usyk, but it definitely does not seem like they want to take that Joe Joyce fight. They would rather go for Anthony Joshua than Joyce, so perhaps there is that situation there as well. They are being difficult because they just don't want to go this route. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and grab that subscribe button. Thanks guys.